Chapter 28. Pong became a bat, sleeping all day with a sheet wrapped tight around his face like wings. He woke at dusk and got ready to go out into the city with Ampai to hunt down faded orbs. Because Samkit's work required the sun, the boys crossed paths only at the dinner table, which was breakfast for Pong. "I feel so weird," said Pong, yawning over a plate of garlicky clams. "This new schedule makes me feel like I'm walking underwater. At the temple, we were up before sunrise and in bed by dusk." "Yeah, but that was before you came to the sleepless city," said Samkit, as he dumped a spoonful of bright chilies onto his food and stirred. Pong's stomach burned just watching him. "This place doesn't come alive until the sun goes down. Besides, you get to go around with Ampai." Samkit grinned and then whispered, "Admit it, it's fun, isn't it?" Pong smiled back. It was fun. Despite his desperation to escape, he loved the nightly excursions with Ampai. Every night when he waited for her near the mud house door, his pulse revved faster, like a boat motor warming up. "You ready, kid?" Ampai would ask, not waiting for his answer before she slipped out into the alley. Pong didn't wear the junior patrol disguise anymore, just plain clothes. But he did keep the cap to cover up his still spiky scalp. "The best way to hide in Chitana is to not hide at all," Ampai told him as she led him along the gangplanks, over a bridge, and out toward one of the main canals. "If you act like you've got nothing to hide, people will believe you. Just follow me and do exactly what I do." Pong swallowed down his fear of being spotted and soon learned to walk forward with purpose, not too fast, not too slow, and to never, ever look over his shoulder. Over the last few nights, Ampai had taken Pong into every pocket of the city. Sometimes they walked, and other times she rowed him in her shallow-bottom boat. While Pong listened to the violet lights hanging outside shops and homes, Ampai distracted the owners, chatting them up as she peeled her tangerines. In spite of the tens of thousands of violet orbs in the city, their work was going more slowly than planned. For one thing, they had to be choosy about where they went. They had the most success in the poorer sections of town, where Ampai had the most connections, and where it was natural for her to strike up conversations with people while Pong made his quick switches. But the other reason they made slow progress was that Ampai had other work to attend to, her main work. She was a stirrer of hearts. "This'll only take a minute," she said, as she rowed the little boat through the network of canals at the southern end of the city. Down here, the city blocks dissolved into rafts of houseboats tied loosely together. Pong watched the people on the decks of their tidy homes as they pulled up nets of glittery carp or sat in semicircles playing card games. Every one of them waved to Ampai as they passed. She tethered the boat to a small floating house bobbing up and down in the reeds. "Kla?" she called, stepping onto the deck. "Hey, it's Ampai. I've brought you some tangerines." A man's deep voice floated out the open doorway. "Tangerines won't help me," said the tall man sadly. "But come in, sister." Pong followed Ampai into the little shack. It was sparsely furnished, but swept as clean as a monk's room. Like most people, this guy Kla called Ampai sister, but one look at them together and it was obvious they weren't even distantly related. He towered over her, a great beast of a man, as big as Yai, but with an even thicker neck and arms that were muscular and brown from working in the sun. He took up almost the entire room all by himself. When Kla raised his eyebrows at Pong, Ampai said, "My assistant. You can trust him." She stood in the center of the dark room with her hands in her pockets. "How's your wife?" Kla nodded at a sheet of cloth covering the doorway to the other room. His face sagged, and Pong was struck by how such a huge man could suddenly seem so small. "Not good," he whispered. "She needs me to be home to care for her, but I gotta work. I gotta go right now, actually. 2 jobs working the docks just to keep us fed. It ain't enough to pay for a doctor, too, especially not the kind she needs." He rubbed his enormous wrists, and Pong noticed that he had a crossed-out tattoo. He had served time in Banglad, the men's prison. Pong stared, awed and a little afraid. Kla slumped on a stool in the corner. I tried to get better work, but you know how it is. Ampai glanced at his wrist and nodded. The giant cradled his forehead in his hands. What am I going to do? I can't get a decent job, not with a prison record. I can't earn enough to get us more light than that thing. He nodded at the single violet orb hanging from the ceiling. We can't cook food, can't boil water. If it goes out, my wife, she'll be in the dark. We're about to change all that, said Ampai. You've been saying that for a long time, sister. Nothing changes. It will this time. We're going to show the people that Chitan is better off without the governor. Ha, barked Claw. You mean the man who saved us all, who brought us into the light? The governor lit the city, said Ampai. That's not the same thing. How many years has it been since you were released from Banglad? 11. 11. Brother, you already served your sentence, and still you're paying the price for one mistake. It's the law, but it isn't what's right. It's time that we showed the governor that he doesn't have control over what's right and what's wrong. And you think a bunch of people standing together are going to make him step aside? Asked Claw. Ampai squared her shoulders. This march that I'm planning isn't just to prove to the governor that he can't dismiss us any longer. It's to prove it to ourselves. Don't you see that? Pong had sat through dozens of these visits with Ampai. He'd heard dozens of versions of these hopeful speeches, but now, as he watched her lift up the giant man using only her words, he felt something shift inside him. He rocked on restless feet, and his chest ached as if his lungs were no longer sitting quite right. Something beneath his rib cage strained and fluttered, bashing against the old walls around his heart. This time is different, continued Ampai. We've got more people on our side than ever before. The march is less than a week away. I told you my goal, to get everyone that lives beneath the violet and blue to come out. He can't ignore us if we have that many people. The giant looked up. And you've got them? Ampai smiled. I will, but I'm missing the dock workers, the great elephants of men like you. I don't want any violence on either side. And if you and your friends show up on the bridge and stand with us, the police will think twice about a confrontation. The big man shook his head. I don't know. You really think the governor is going to change things just because a bunch of people stand on a bridge all at once? We're like little fruit flies to him. Ampai's eyes glimmered in the dim room. I've got something up my sleeve that will show without a shadow of a doubt that we don't need him. She threw Pong a wink. We can change things forever, but only if there's enough of us. That bridge has to be full. Say you'll be there with me? Nothing in the shack had changed, but somehow the shadows seemed pushed to the corners. Claw looked up at Ampai. All right, me and my crew will be there. Ampai flashed him a grin. Good. And until then, this is for you. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tangerine. She handed it to Claw. It was wrapped in a sheaf of money. Tears brimmed at the lids of Claw's eyes, but Ampai whisked Pong back to the boat before he could thank her. Even after Ampai rowed them back to solid ground, Pong felt dizzy, as if they were still bobbing up and down on Claw's house. They had more work to do, but he dawdled, hanging back in the shadows of a side alley. Hey, little guy, said Ampai, stopping to wait for him. You okay? Hungry? I'm not hungry, said Pong. Ampai sauntered back toward him. What's wrong, then? You're tired? It's not easy staying up all night, is it? It isn't that, said Pong quietly. It's just that I just realized that we're really different. Ampai grinned. She was in a good mood, and she was trying to pass it on. It's true. You don't eat enough oranges. Pong shook his head. He didn't want to joke or laugh this off. No, I mean... He took a deep breath and let all the words out at once. You look at this city and you see everything that's wrong with it, and you want to fix it. I look at it and I see all the same things, but I just don't think it's possible to fix any of it. Ampai tilted her head and raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to go on. When something's really broken, when it's bad, said Pong, you can't fix it. You can't make it good. Ampai's face softened, and even though she wasn't much taller than Pong, she leaned down to look at him square in the eyes. What are we talking about now? The city or a boy? Pong looked away. I don't know what you mean. You're wrong, she said. We aren't so different. We have much more in common than you know. Ampai unbuttoned the left cuff of her jacket sleeve and rolled it up. She held her wrist out to Pong. For a moment, he thought she was about to show him a prison mark, but her dark bronze skin was bare. Instead, she hooked a finger up her sleeve and pulled down a thin, woven bracelet. Pong stared. Ampai wore a bracelet just like the last one Father Cham had given him, red and gold braided together. The colors had faded a bit, but otherwise it was identical. But how? He whispered. Where did you get that? The same place you did. Ampai glanced up at the buildings towering over them. I was one of those babies born among the ashes of the Great Fire. Before the governor came, they called us basket babies, the ones who floated downriver to Tanaburi. I grew up there, going to the village school, but I spent more of my time at the temple, studying with Father Cham. He was my teacher until I grew old enough to move to Chitana on my own. Pong couldn't take his eyes off Ampai's bracelet. I can't believe you knew him. Ampai's eyes twinkled at the happy memory. And yes, he was old when I knew him, in case you're wondering. She nodded at Pong's wrist. You have all those white ones. He gave them to me too, though never as many as you have. They snapped off a long time ago. He'd always tell me things like, may you never get kicked by a donkey. And did it come true? Asked Pong. Ampai tossed her hair back and laughed. I've never even seen a donkey. Pong laughed too. That sounds like something he'd say. He didn't give out many of these, though, said Ampai, tapping her own red bracelet. In fact, you're the first person I've met in a long time who has one. What did he tell you when he gave it to you? Pong started to answer, but the words wouldn't come. The image of Father Cham lying in the temple came back to him. Pong thought about how he'd demanded his freedom, how he'd disrespected his teacher. He didn't think he could talk without crying. It's okay, said Ampai gently. You don't have to tell me. Do you want to know what my blessing was? Pong looked up at her. He remembered how Father Cham had told him that he'd change the types of blessings he gave out. He'd stopped trying to alter the world with his gift. Ampai placed her hand on her chest. He told me, may your courage never falter. Pong swallowed and steadied his breath. Ampai, did you know that Father Cham died? Her eyes shimmered, but only for a moment before becoming steely again. I did hear that, she whispered. She took Pong's hand. Look, he gave you that bracelet because he believed you were special. He believed you were good. He believed everyone was good, whispered Pong. Ampai squeezed his hand in hers. He believed in you. He knew who you were, and he didn't think you were broken. Pong shut his eyes. He tried to let what Ampai said settle in his mind, but he could only hear the same words he'd heard constantly over the years. You were born in darkness, and that will never change. The words still terrified him, but there was something comfortable about them too. Father Cham had wished for Pong to find what he was looking for, freedom, and he would be free. He would turn his back on all this darkness, all this hurt, and finally get away from it. He slowly pulled his hand out of Ampai's. Without meeting her gaze, he said, we should go get more orbs before we run out of time.